Hey everyone, welcome back to the CyberPod with me, Tarek.
And me, Kash.
Thank you for joining us for the last few episodes. This is the final episode of our Threats to Your Business series, and it's all about the insider threat. So the last few episodes have been all around the external attackers. So how, users might try and phish you, try and do web-based attacks, might try and deploy some malware or some ransomware onto your systems. This one's going to take a slightly different direction and look at more of the user behind the scenes. So often when we discuss things like phishing, malware, web-based attacks, the common mitigations are, having boundary protection in place. So looking at your perimeter and saying, okay, do we have antivirus software, endpoint protection in place? Can we filter the traffic that's coming in to a way that we control, our boundaries and our perimeters? Cool. What this one's more about is, okay, once you're behind the scenes and you're actually a user inside of there, you have a lot more trust and a lot more access potentially to do things. And so these techniques are far less useful. So now we're going to start looking at more of the insider threat.
Yeah, and I think it's about that layered approach, right? Not the eggshell. And the eggshell is an example used by, I think, penetration testers generally. And what they say is sometimes the perimeter is hard like an eggshell. But once you crack that egg, it's really easy inside, soft and easy to move around. Whereas what you want, not a good example, but it's a terminology they tend to use. So I'll just throw it out there. At least ones that I've worked with. If there's a pen tester on here who's like, I've never heard that. I didn't make it up.
So we don't do that.
But what you want is a layered defense, like an onion. You peel back one layer, there's another layer underneath.
Yeah.
Enough about food. I'm hungry.
I know, I can tell. So what is the insider threat?
So insider threat is typically broken into two areas. You have the malicious insider and you have the accidental or inadvertent insider. So we'll start with the malicious, and these ones are potentially the easier ones to understand, dissect, and defend against, because it's a disgruntled employee. Something has happened to lead them to being disgruntled.
I don't know anyone that doesn't have some sort of grievance at work.
Yeah. It's not a grievance, but if I said to you, you're losing your job within a month, I know now for that month you are a high risk individual. I need to monitor what you're doing. Yeah. If I've just had a one-to-one with you where it's not been a good one-to-one, I know you're potentially a bigger risk right now. If you've been overlooked for a promotion, that's another reason. If you're being paid less than your co-workers, that's potentially another reason. If you didn't get your bonus, money is usually a big reason.
Yeah.
But it gives you an idea. You're like, okay, cool. I understand why it's happening. There's also the other side where somebody's bribed or blackmailed them. Usually that's involving the threat actors, sophisticated threat actors we spoke about in the past, like organized crime networks or advanced persistent threats, where they want to get into your organization. Maybe you work for a bank and they want to rob you. And so they blackmail you or they bribe you to helping them get in. But for most organizations, it's a disgruntled employee.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something you've got to be very wary of.
Yeah. And then it's monitoring them, whether they're carrying out the attack or they're giving access to somebody who is malicious to get in and then carry out an attack.
Yeah, a big one there about having your monitoring and login on. I remember that being quite contentious in office. So, but yeah, then the inadvertent side is a little bit less clear, I guess, because it might actually be more concerning, even though because of that lack of clarity, right? Because most users, if they're unhappy with a company, won't actually risk prison time by hacking their own company, right? They might indirectly lead to something. But actually, inadvertent insiders can also be somebody that genuinely just doesn't realise what they're doing. So it can be people that do a software update or make a change to an application or service, people that change the firewall policy, that kind of thing. Anything where someone makes a change without fully doing their due diligence, and that exposes an application or a service, and actually, in doing so, has made that application vulnerable. And so it's having things in place that actually, not just helps staff to, have their awareness training and make sure that they're aware of the risks of actions that they can take, but also there's mechanisms in place to validate that, okay, I'm trying to make a change, somebody else needs to approve that change. It can't just be me looking at it with the same eyes and going, I wrote that code, obviously it's fine. Somebody else needs to look at it and go, okay, is that code doing what it's supposed to be doing? But yeah, I guess I'd say...
But even as little as emails, right? Sending it to, I don't know.
It's easy to make a mistake with your email typing, yeah.
Tarek with an I instead of Tarek with two E's or something like that. It's an easy mistake to make, probably one a lot of people have made in the past. But if the email contains sensitive information, that could be a breach.
Well, to be fair, one I do remember, I think was so obviously you've got the BCC field, right? So the blind, is it carbon? I never actually understood what CC stands for. Is it carbon copy?
I'm not sure.
I know one of the words is copy, right? Yeah. But essentially within an email, right, you've got different fields. You can directly address it to somebody. You can CC somebody else in. So you're copying somebody else into the conversation and everyone can see that person is copied in. Then you can also have the blind copy. So they can't see who else has been copied into that. Yep. So for example, if I'm within the HR department, I might send a message out to 50 people, but I won't want the other recipients to know that other people have been sent that email as well. So I put everyone in the blind copy. Problem being, if you accidentally put it in the copy instead of the blind copy, everyone else on that distribution knows about those other details. And so if you're sending out an email from that aspect, you might then include a load of different suppliers. You might send out a big thank you email to your suppliers at the end of the year. But in doing so, you copy them all in, and now they're all aware of each other, and they all know
who your suppliers are. I think I've seen somebody in marketing do that in the past, but that's another.
Yeah, and it's easy mistakes to make, right? And it's not necessarily a malicious thing, but it's something that can have a significant issue.
You've got a security incident, and you need to deal with it accordingly.
So I guess it leads into nicely. Why is this such a big issue then? Insider threats.
Insider threat. I think it's harder to see coming. They have a level of trust. I think you mentioned earlier where you protect your boundary because you don't trust the people outside, but generally you trust the people you work with or you work for, or those who work for you, your employees. That's why you hire them. If you didn't trust them, you wouldn't hire them. Yeah. So with that trust, they get given access to information that's potentially sensitive, confidential, that should only be within the business, but if they want to use this for malicious reasons, can, and that can have a hugely negative impact on your organization. And sometimes it can be extremely difficult to identify somebody who's going to do something malicious. So if it's not an email, if they're deliberately planning on being malicious, you don't necessarily know they're going to be.
Yeah.
It's hard to detect.
Yeah.
There are tools to help you, and we'll touch on those later in the episode. But it's the information they have access to. They know who the key stakeholders are. They know where information is located. They don't need to come in and do that initial reconnaissance because they already know it. They know who looks after the money. If they send an email internally from themselves to finance know who that person is. If the finance reaches out to verify it's come from them, they say, yeah, it did. That can lead to something malicious happening. They have that trust, and they're best placed. They may even know which security tools you have in place. If you're using data loss prevention DLP rules, they may know which rules and policies you have in place and how to circumvent those. So yeah, they have a huge advantage of knowing where things are and how to avoid them.
Yeah, and often it's if you do have like security, like areas or security challenges within your organization. So there are things that are on the backlog that you haven't got around to doing. Those users are aware of, right? And they're best placed to go, actually, I know there's a big hole there. And I know that, it's going to be very difficult for them to detect that I'm actually doing this. And then, like you said about when they actually go around contacting people, like I said, even if we have a really good policy in place that says, okay, I can't approve my own work, so I try and deploy some malicious code, but I can't approve it myself. If I send you a message and say, I've just done some code, I'm behind on something, like, can you just approve me pretty quickly?
Yeah, this deadline that was due on Friday, but it's now Tuesday.
Yeah, you know me, you've worked with me for a few years. You might also be busy. You might say, yeah, okay, fine. I know him. He works for the company. Cool. I'm just going to approve it. So actually, you have an air of legitimacy because people know you. Someone reaches out to you and goes, did you mean to do this? And you say, yeah, of course I did. Yeah, of course I meant to do that. So yeah, I think it's really hitting home about how much of an advantage an insider has over an external entity. It's that whole thing of trust, right? It's that you are a trusted entity.
And if you're, even from a monitoring point of view, if you're behaving normally, that's not abnormal traffic that can be identified during security monitoring.
Yeah, so the security tool picks up that I've deployed some code to a server. It's like, that's what he normally does. So I've not noticed anything abnormal out of the situation. You've approved it. That's what normally happens.
And it may not even get picked up because that's your normal actions.
Yeah, so I guess if we touch on a few key examples, right? So two high-profile ones involving two pretty huge companies. But we start May 2023, so two former employees. So we talk about shadow IT and joiners, movers and leavers before, right? So two former employees stole and leaked Tesla's confidential information to a German news outlet. And so the investigation showed that actually malicious actors breached the IT security and data protection policies. So it's people that know about these policies. They know what's in place and what isn't in place, so they know how to circumvent them. And they obtained and disclosed like 23,000 internal documents, which amounted to like nearly 100 gigabytes of confidential information. Right now, depending on whatever company you work for or whatever organization you run, you have something about you that makes you competitive or is your enabler to make money, right? So that is the thing that somebody who works at that company knows is most valuable, okay? Because it's not someone, like you said, doing recon and going, okay, I want to cause some damage or I want to cause an issue to this company. It's, oh no, I know exactly what is valuable to them. It's their intellectual property. And so in this case, okay, the intellectual property is the main thing. I'm going to leak it all. And in doing so, their competitors will know all of this intellectual property, will allow them to gain that competitive edge on them. So these former employees haven't actually gained anything financially, but they've caused significant damage to the organization themselves. And so not only are you losing that competitive edge, but because sensitive data has been leaked, Tesla was actually at risk of, a huge fine for this because, there's insufficient data protection processes in place. Just because a user works for that company doesn't mean that they should be able to circumvent those protection controls. You should have adequate protection and controls in place to detect against external entities, but also your internal entities as well. And so really highlights how we had a whole episode on threat actors, and the one that comes to mind is people always assume, okay, they want something financial, they want to gain, like a threat actor wants something. And like anyone that knows me knows I quote movies all the time. Absolute cracker is the Dark Knight one. Some men just want to watch the world burn, right? Some people don't actually want to gain anything from a scenario, and particularly when you've got a disgruntled employee. Okay, they might be after a payday or they might be after some remuneration. They might just be after some revenge. They might just be really, annoyed and going, I want to cause some damage to this company now. And I don't care if, I'm losing my job anyway. I'm probably going to flee the country, so let them chase me. So I think it's that aspect, right, of making sure you've protected against the insider threat. So then we got another example, similar kind of thing, intellectual property. So Apple suing Rivos, so a chip development startup, for allegedly stealing their trade secrets, right? Because Rivos had hired more than like 40 previous engineers from Apple. So at least 2 of the former engineers they were claiming had stolen gigabytes of confidential information. And this is I've worked for companies who have fairly mature cybersecurity programs in place. And one of the diligence on one of their suppliers, and actually part of their supply chain is very vulnerable.
Yep.
And they're relying on that supply chain for a customer portal or something where there is potentially sensitive data in there. So you're not getting compromised yourself, you're getting indirectly compromised because a member of your supply chain is being impacted. But guess what? It's your data that's in there. And as the data controller, you're responsible for securing it. So it doesn't matter that it's a supplier that's been compromised there. You've chosen to entrust that supplier with that data. So ultimately, it's your responsibility to do that due diligence and validate that that supplier is behaving in alignment with your security posture.
Yeah. And I think that's it from me on this point.
Awesome.
So thank you for listening, and please do share the podcast with anyone who you think might benefit from this.
Yeah.
And again, if you have any questions or feedback, then reach out to us.
Yeah, that's been the end of our introduction to cybersecurity service for small businesses. Hopefully it's been of value, and look forward to the next series that we start next week. So
yeah, and I believe the next series is probably a big one and a little bit more technical, and we'll talk about what is. So we've talked about all these different elements of incident response. What is incident response? How does it work? And we've talked about threat hunting, threat modeling. What do they actually mean? How do they work?
How do you actually do them properly?
How do you actually do it? So we'll go into a lot of these individual functions in more detail and explain how they work and what they are.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of the CyberPod, and we'll see you on the next one.